Good morning, all of you. Welcome you all to Ansarkari, and I hope that you all must be doing great. So let's start with our today's discussion for 24th of January 2023. So first news piece is regarding formation of a Maricom-led panel that is going to probe the wrestlers' charges against the president of the Wrestling Federation of India. So he has been accused of several allegations, which includes sexual misconduct, harassment and intimidation, financial irregularities, and administrative lapses. So this panel is going to probe into all these allegations, and it has been formed by the Indian Olympic Association. And the president, he also has certain criminal cases pending against him. So what do you feel, is it right to appoint such personalities who have criminal cases still pending, and he's also an MP from UP? So again, we know about criminalization of politics, so people having serious allegations against them, having like criminal cases pending against them, who are criminals, they are coming into politics. So definitely it hampers the healthy functioning of democracy, and obviously we can say that it leads to certain diversion in fulfilling the objectives and meeting the end objective, that is welfare of all. So this panel has been formed, and it will be probing all these allegations. Then we have news about norovirus. So it's a virus which is mostly spread through contaminated food and water, and the symptoms are vomiting, diarrhea, head and body aches. So recently in Kerala, two students have been infected with norovirus. And on 23rd of January, that is celebrated as Parakram Divas, as the birth anniversary of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. So we celebrated the 126th birth anniversary of Netaji, and this is celebrated as Parakram Divas. So the Prime Minister, he has named 21 Andaman Islands after the Paramveer Chakra awardees, and these islands, they were unnamed. So this is there, that is, we can say, addressing their contribution, for celebrating their contributions to the nation. And Assam says that it will be booking men who will be marrying girls below 14 years under the POCSO Act. So again, this is a step taken by the state of Assam dealing with the child marriages. So, citing a data from the National Family Health Survey 5, that is there for 2019-20, so it says that an average of 31.8% of girls in Assam, they get married at the prohibited age, and 11.7% of them, they become mothers before adulthood, compared with the national average. So, national average is 23% and approximately 7% respectively for these two indicators. And because of, we can say, child marriages, there is high rate of maternal and infant mortality rates, and the main reason is child marriage. So men who will be marrying girls between the age of 14 and 18 years, they will be booked under this POCSO Act of 2006 and Prohibition of the Child Marriage Act of 2006, and the child protection officer will be appointed in every village. So this is one step. So basically, this must be, firstly, it should be analyzed by every state about the level of child marriages, and it is also prevalent in states like Rajasthan. So it needs to be dealt at the state level by undergoing a proper and thorough micro analysis of this issue. So coming to the editorial page, here we'll be talking about democracy and its structural slippages. So all about democracy and what are the different notions about equality. We'll be understanding the different notions of equality through some historical examples, and talking about the main features of democracy and how they are practiced in India. So we see that democracy, that is functional around the world today, and it is a Western creation, which we can say, obviously it has evolved over time, but it essentially, it is a 19th to 20th century Western creation. So democracy, it has its roots in the Western world. Now, when we talk about what the basic feature of democracy, So it includes devolution of power and welfare of all. So that's how you can define democracy, or we can say democracy means when people have the power. So power lies with the people. So we see that near universal, okay, we see that devolution, it occurs on the premise of the individual and the equality. So now we'll be looking at what are the different notions about equality, and we'll be understanding with the help of certain historical examples. Firstly, we see that the near universal abolition of autocratic monarchies and the hereditary aristocracies, and the replacement by the governance through the popular mandate, and there was spread of economic resources, infrastructure, education, and health, is one notion of equality that we can say started with it. Then we see that there is unbreakable link between the widespread of this devolution of power, that is democracy, and capitalism. So there is an unbreakable link between these two. And when we understand what do we mean by capitalism, so it favored freedom for resources such as land, labor, and movement from the autocratic restraints of the medieval monarchies. The notions of the individual's rights and equality evolved, then which culminated in the notion of a free market for every kind of resource. So we know when we talk about, or when we speak about free market, so it is the forces of demand and supply which is working and which is determining the prices in a free market. So that is there in case of capitalism. So with capitalism, this idea was also promoted, and it culminated into the notion of free markets, which obviously implied great deal of uniformity. So this is the second notion, how we can see the how we can see and understand the idea of equality. Then we come to see the experiences of equality mostly in the religious form. So certain religions like Buddhism and Christianity, Islam, and Sikhism, they were proponents of social equality, but their equality, it demanded subjugation of the individual to the community or the society. So this is the third notion of understanding equality, and it was the same urge that had led to the most recent experiment of the Marxian socialism. So here we are understanding it from the perspective of different ideologies, which is there. Firstly, like we are taking an example through the Marxian socialism. So, but we see that there is no egalitarian ideology that has ever been able to create an egalitarian society. And what lies behind such ideologies is that they just aim at reshuffling the existing social hierarchies, the existing institutions, and how things are working, that are reshuffled, and it creates some space for upward movement of the lower rungs. So that is their main idea, or how the process goes ahead when we talk about establishing equalities through different ideologies. But equality has found diverse ways to seek utterance, and in the current times, equality, it seeks to establish uniformity through the same or the similar institutions and practices that we have right now. So the institutions that we have, the practices that we are following, we are trying to establish equality through them. So uniformity takes the form of periodic multi-party free and fair elections. So this is one method, the current method. Secondly, guaranteeing of various kinds of freedoms under we have like fundamental rights. We have Article 19 in the Constitution. Then we also have freedom of the markets also. That comes with globalization and liberalization. So this is the current idea that we are practicing, and we are using it to promote more equality. So firstly, we'll talk about the conduct of elections. So are the elections really free and fair? So right now we see that the voters, they are divided into W's majority. We categorize them into majority and minority, specifically on the basis of their religion. And in India, we have the first past the post principle. So whenever any political party wins majority, so it is not on, we can say, 50 plus 1 or 50 minus 1 basis. That is, it is through the first past the post principle, where we see that 30% to 40% of the votes casted, they give party a comfortable majority to rule legitimately. So that is there. And This is one aspect. So, secondly, we see that contrary to the theory, even as the voter is all alone in the polling booth, so here we are talking about the freedom to the voter. So, when it comes to casting a vote, so here we see, although the voter who casts his or her vote, he or she is completely free, but there are certain conditions or certain things that go back in his or her mind, which includes certain demands from family, from community, from the perspective of religion, culture, and above all, what are the political alternatives that are offered by the political parties. So, combined all these things together, a person casts his or her vote. And this is the second thing that we can say, are the elections really free and fair? So, firstly, we saw about the 50-50 majority, which is not there. It is on the basis of first past the post principle. Secondly, the freedom of the voter. And when we talk about reinforcement of identity, so specifically in India, we see that democracy, it came to India in its modern form, which included unconditional adult franchise, which is right to vote, and the multi-party periodic elections. But the operative categories of the electoral politics, here they have mostly been pre-modern. So what do we mean by pre-modern practices that are still prevalent before the coming of this modern idea of democracy into India, and still they are prevalent? That is the identity politics of caste, subcaste, community, region, language. So on the basis of caste, the political parties, they divide their vote bank on the basis of the caste. Like you have might have heard about the term Mai, which is Mai represents Muslims and Yadav. So this is in the context of the state of UP. So that's how we can say that there is identity politics. And Jawaharlal Nehru, he had hoped that education and the experience of democracy, it would force a retreat on these operative categories and generate more modern consciousness among the masses. But things did not happen this way, and what was happened was completely contrary to this expectation. And we see that these identities, they are reinforced over time and they have not weakened. So that is there. So that's how we can say how, when we talk about the conduct of elections and their free and fair nature. So there are three things that we discussed, and we talked about democracy, the ideas of democracy, different notions of equality with the help of certain examples. So as long as we practice this form of democracy, its fault lines, and above all, its link with capitalism will remain unbroken. So this we need to pay certain attention when, specifically when we are talking about vote bank, but again it's politics. So our main idea should be regarding strengthening this democracy by like going ahead or promoting more of cooperative federalism by giving true power to the people who are the voters, and that's how we need to move forward. Next up, firstly, we see that the investment in the capital markets through the participatory notes, that is P notes, it declines. So you should be knowing what are P notes. So these are issued by the registered FPIs, that is the foreign portfolio investors, to the overseas investors. So the overseas investors, they use these participatory notes in order to invest in the Indian capital market by registering themselves with the FPIs to be part of the Indian stock market indirectly and not directly. Now, coming again to the whole debate around the basic structure of the constitution that is going on. So again, here, this is very important article here, the complete evolution of the basic structure doctrine is given. So we'll be looking at that evolution, and we see that at the heart of the current debate over the Supreme Court collegium and the striking down of the NJAC commission, there is a fundamental question that, does parliament have unlimited power to amend the constitution, or is it subject to certain inherent limitations? So let's start with this article. We know that there is a landmark judgment which is known as the Kesavananda Bharati case of 1973, which led to the origin of basic structure doctrine. And this case is also known as the fundamental rights case. So the basic structure doctrine, the Kesavananda Bharati judgment, it held that Parliament cannot use its constituent power to alter this basic structure, or to essential features of the Constitution. So this was the basic judgment regarding the Kesavananda Bharati case in 1973. So there are certain, we can say, the elements or the components of the basic structure are highlighted over here. You can go through them. There are a lot of, and there are a lot many which are still not identified by the Supreme Court. So it is not that if they are not identified by the Supreme Court in their judgments, so they fail to be part of this basic structure doctrine. It is not that. So now let's start with the complete evolution. Starting from the very beginning, we see that there was Golaknath verdict of 1967, which upheld the power of judicial review of the constitutional amendments that was there, and the government, it introduced several constitutional amendments. So the government that was appointed, that came to power in 1971, it introduced several constitutional amendments, and one of them was the 24th Constitutional Amendment, which changed Article 13. So, under Article 13, a provision which mandated that no law could take away or abridge the fundamental rights. So, this article, it had this thing that no law can take away or violate any fundamental rights. And the Golaknath judgment, it had interpreted that term law in Article 13, it will also include the constitutional amendments also. So apart from the laws, the bills that are passed by the parliament, the constitutional amendments are also considered as law under Article 13, and this was upheld under the Golaknath judgment. Then we saw that Parliament, it came up with the 24th Constitutional Amendment, which said that a constitutional amendment cannot be rendered void merely because it infringed the fundamental rights. So this was completely opposite to what the Supreme Court had upheld under Article 13, and it also modified Article 368. So Article 368, it empowers the Parliament to go ahead with the constitutional amendment. So it also modified this Article 368 to enable the Parliament to add, vary, or to repeal any article of the Constitution. So again, basically we can say the Parliament was being made more powerful, and the 13-judge bench, it upheld the Parliament's power to amend the Constitution as long as it adhered to its basic structure or the essential features. So this was, we can say, again, the Supreme Court judgment. So again, it was just emphasizing that you cannot violate the basic structure or the essential features of the Constitution. Then comes the 25th Constitutional Amendment, which introduced Article 31C in the Constitution to implement the DPSPs, which were mentioned under Article 39B and 39C. So, two DPSPs which are mentioned under Article 39B and 39C for distribution, which are regarding the distribution of the material resources of the community, and secondly is to prevent the concentration of wealth. So this was the 25th Constitutional Amendment, and the government's aim was to facilitate nationalization of industries and socialist measures through this amendment. So the amendment mandated that any law which enacted with this objective, it cannot be deemed void on the ground that it was inconsistent with the fundamental rights. So basically, it held that if there is any law which is implementing or which is furthering the objective under these two DPSPs would not be held void because it is violating any fundamental right. So this was the 25th Constitutional Amendment. So we can say that Article 31C, it added that such a law, it would also be outside the judicial review. So it was made so narrow that even the power to judicially review any law implementing these two DPSPs cannot be judicially reviewed was also contained in this constitutional amendment. So this amendment gave directive principles more primacy over the fundamental rights, and judicial review of the apex court was also taken away. So in the Nani Palkiwala case, the 13-judge bench, it invalidated the part of the Article 31C, which took away the power of judicial review of the court. So this was again we can say, in part, this amendment was turned down, or it was like half of it was overturned by the Supreme Court under this Nani Palkiwala case. So this was there, and then we see how Supreme Court, it has used this basic structure doctrine in several judgment, which includes the Indira Gandhi versus the Raj Naran case, which is a very famous case, which it removed the 39th constitutional amendment passed during the emergency period, which put the elections of the president, vice president, prime minister, and Lok Sabha speaker beyond judicial review. So here, this 39th constitutional amendment was again overturned by the Supreme Court under this case. And in the 1980 Minerva Mills case also, the challenge to the 42nd Amendment to uphold the judicial review of the constitutional amendments and to protect the fundamental rights was upheld by the Supreme Court using the basic structure formula. So we see how this thing, the basic structure doctrine, it has evolved, and how at that point of time when emergency was also imposed during 1975, how Parliament was trying to give itself more powers, how we can say it was in certain amendments, it was taking away the power of judicial review of the Supreme Court, how it was giving more primacy to the DPSPs over the fundamental rights, how it was basically making the elections of president, vice president, prime minister, and Lok Sabha speaker beyond judicial review. So with time, we can say Supreme Court, it also overturned certain things which were against the basic structure doctrine. And we know that in 1973, the Kesavananda Bharati judgment was again a landmark judgment by the Supreme Court. So this basic structure or the framework of this constitution, it is its living spirit holding up the body of its text. So it is the soul of the constitution, inextricably linked to the values enshrined in the preamble, without which this document, the constitution, and the ideas that make it sacred, they would collapse. So this is all, and it is extremely important article. So there is a lot of information that becomes important for both prelims and mains, and you need to note them down at one place and keep revising it. Then we move forward. So here for us, what is important is that this article is talking about dark sky, and there are two pictures, basically one where you have the electricity connections and there is so much of like lights which are switched on, and what is or how does it looks when there is like the light has been cut off. So the difference is that when there is no light pollution, the amount of stars, the amount of more number of stars which are visible compared to the situation when there is so much of light pollution. You can see that here you cannot see much of stars, but in case when there is no lights, you can see a lot of number of stars. So this is basically the regarding dark sky and about the light pollution. So here there's one important information for us for prelims. So that is that recently the district administration of Ladakh, it has designated 6 hamlets within the Changtang Wildlife Sanctuary as dark sky reserve, which is going to be an area whose sky is free of light pollution. And the designation meant that the reserve had a responsibility to keep the skies dark, particularly for the astronomical observatories which are located in the area. So that is there. And recently, one dark sky observatory has also been installed, or we can say initiated and inaugurated in this area. So you need to name that in the comment section. And we see that BSF Camel contingent, it is going to have women personals, and you can see them in the picture practicing. So the president, she gives a prime minister's national award to children. So you should be knowing that these awards are given by the president of India. So that is the Pradhan Mantri Rashtriya Bal Puraskar 2023. Have been awarded to 11 children by the president of India. And again, this is important for our prelims. So this is regarding the commissioning of the 5th Scorpion class submarine, which is known as the INS Vagir. And this is a Scorpion class conventional submarine. Then you see that the 6th, and this is the 6th and the last of the French origin Scorpion class submarines. 6th, okay, so the next one is going to be Swagshir, and it is being built in India under the technology transfer. So Navy, it now has 16 conventional and 1 nuclear submarine in the service. So we have 7 Russian Kilo class submarines, 4 German submarines, 5 Scorpion class submarines, and the indigenous nuclear ballistic missile submarine, which is the INS Arihant. So that is there, and the earlier submarines that have been commissioned under this program are INS Kalvari, INS Khanderi, INS Karanj, and this is the fifth one is INS Vakshir, and there is INS Vela, which has been commissioned. Now the last one is going to be the INS Vakshir. Then from the business page, we see that no foreign investment cap is going to be there on the sovereign green bonds. So these are, firstly, you should be knowing that these are being issued by the Indian government, and there are not going to be any restrictions on the foreign investment. So such securities, they will be counted as specific securities under the fully accessible route. So the fully accessible route, it includes securities which do not have any restrictions on holdings by the foreign investors. So such securities are known as the specified securities, and these are going to be the green bonds. So whatever fund or whatever amount is going to be raised through them, that is only going to be invested for the green projects. So that is there, and that's all from the Hindu. We'll take up important information from Mint. So in Mint, we are going to see how Indian banking is changing, what are the different trends that we can see. So firstly, it is regarding that we are seeing that banks, they are stagnating now over a period of last decade. They have been stagnant. So in this graph, you can see how the deposit share and how the outstanding bank loans, they have changed. So earlier both were increasing and now they are at stagnant level. So that is there. Second, we see the retail sector. So banks, they now prefer to give more retail loans over the industrial loans. So again, in the graph, you can see the share of industrial loans, it has sharply declined, and that of retail loans is increasing. So retail loans is basically given to the individual customers, and industry loans, obviously, they are bigger in amount. So we are seeing how this trend is also changing. Next, we see that the private banks, they have been gaining greater share of banking system. So again, here you can see the dark pink color is for the public sector banks. Then private sector banks are more than the public sector banks, and then there are other banks. So that is there. And next we see regarding the NPAs and the loan written off by the banks. So banks, they have written off the loans in order to clean up their balance sheets. And you can see how sharply the NPAs has increased, and also the loans which are written off by the bank is also increased. So it is because of writing down them off that has led to the clearing of the or cleaning of the bank's balance sheet, and not resolution of those NPAs. So we see that obviously you should be knowing about the meaning of what is the meaning of NPA. So non-performing assets which are not performing, basically these are bad loans which are not repaid for a period of 90 days or more, either the interest or the principal amount. So the major reason for this reduction in the gross NPAs has been increase in the bad loans being written off by the banks. So the bad loans worth more than rupees 10 trillion, they have been written off for the last 5 financial years. And loans that have remained bad loans for 4 years and against which 100% provisioning has been carried out, they can be dropped from the balance sheet. So two conditions are there. Either they have been under the category of bad loans for 4 years, and secondly, there must have been 100% provisioning done for them by the banks. So only then you can write them off, and which leads to a reduction in the bad loans of the bank. So recovery efforts for bad loans, they have been written off continue, and though the recovery rate is abysmal. And in the last 5 financial years, rupees 1 trillion of written off loans were recovered. So that is there. And looking at the performance of different states. So here one ratio which is important is the state's credit to deposit ratio. So what this ratio depicts is that whatever are the share of or whatever is the deposits in a particular state's bank accounts, how much of those deposits are given into form of credit by these banks. So we see that This ratio is least in case of Jharkhand. So Jharkhand, it continues to have the least ratio, and its credit deposit ratio as of 2014, it was 0.3, which means only 30% of the deposits which were sourced from the state, they were lent in that particular state. So that is the clear and actual meaning of this ratio, and that is there. And the best performing state was Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, mostly the southern states. So that's all for today. Thank you for joining Ansarkari. I hope you've understood all the key things. And the most important article was regarding the evolution of the basic structure doctrine and several Supreme Court judgments and what were the constitutional amendments. So you can go ahead and have a look at the PDF also. So you'll get the link in the description box. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share this video as much as possible. Thank you so much for joining us today.